If you've spent any time around retirement research, you've probably run into the phrase that the first 5 years of retirement are the most dangerous. And that statement is backed by data, including data from Morningstar, which shows that the vast majority of retirement plans that run into trouble do so because they ran into issues early on. Now, I want to quickly acknowledge something. I actually just did a video on this topic, a video called How the First 5 Years of Retirement Matter More Than the Next 25. And this video right here is actually inspired by a comment that was on that video. Someone asked a really good follow-up question. What happens to the danger window if you retire early and your retirement lasts much longer? And that's a perspective that I often feel doesn't get much attention in retirement planning. So today, I want to walk through exactly that scenario and what happens. So what actually happens to the risk window when you retire early? Because if you retire at 45 or 50 or 55, the first 5-year rule of retirement doesn't disappear, but it doesn't automatically just get stretched out in the way that many people might believe. So today we're going to answer a very specific question. What actually happens to that danger zone if you retire early? How long does it last? And how do you plan around it? The reason the first 5 years of retirement matter so much is math. When markets fall early on in retirement, while you are simultaneously making withdrawals, this damage can become permanent. You're not just losing value on paper, you're selling assets at depressed prices. And once you sell those assets, when the market does inevitably rebound, those sold assets don't get to participate in the rebound. That's what we call sequence of returns risk. Research from Morningstar put real numbers behind this. They found that nearly 70% of failed retirement plans experienced portfolio losses within the first 5 years. And for retirees who made it through that early window with gains, their odds of a later failure dropped dramatically to just 4%. So yes, early timing absolutely matters, but there is a very important assumption being baked into all of this, and it's that this research assumes a very traditional retirement timeline. Morningstar's research is actually very clear and very precise about what's driving the risk here. What they show is that sequence of returns risk is most powerful when 3 things collide all at once. When the markets are volatile, when withdrawals are being made, and when the portfolio has no outside support. That is the danger zone, and once retirees make it through that early window, and if they do so with gains, their odds of failure drop dramatically, and it's because the structure of the plan changes. And this distinction really matters. Morningstar is not saying the first 5 calendar years are inherently dangerous. They're identifying when withdrawals and volatility collide without a safety net. So why does this 5-year window consistently show up in the data? Well, this is generally the window when a traditional portfolio is exposed. Many people retire and they haven't yet claimed Social Security, but it's soon on the time horizon. So really this 5-year rule is acting like a proxy for something a bit deeper. Sequence risk isn't defined by time alone. It's defined by dependency. Risk is highest when a portfolio is a primary or sole source of income, when withdrawals are rigid, and there's no guaranteed income sources to really act as a shock absorber. This is exactly what Morningstar's research shows. Then once you layer in Social Security, more flexible withdrawal strategies, and lower volatility early on, portfolio stress drops dramatically. Failure rates absolutely plummet. In fact, here's what Morningstar's research says explicitly. Guaranteed income reduces pressure on the portfolio. Flexibility dramatically lowers early failure risk. And once outside income is present, portfolios stabilize. So really, when we break it down, the correct way to interpret the 5-year rule is just a flag for when your portfolio is really doing all of the work. Here's the assumption most retirement research quietly makes. Retirement starts in your early 60s. because this is what is typical for Americans. Social Security is not far away, and the planning horizon is roughly 25 to 30 years. Under those conditions, it often is the first 5 years that are the most dangerous, and that's because soon help is coming in. Soon we get those extra income floors that act as a buffer. We might get some flexibility in our withdrawals. There's less forced selling. But an early retirement breaks those assumptions. So once we have an early retirement, we have to redefine what the danger zone is. If you retire at 50 and plan to claim Social Security at 70, you're asking your portfolio to do something very different. Instead of 5 years as a danger zone, you might now be looking at 15 or 20 years before any meaningful income floors arrive. So now instead of asking, can my portfolio survive the most dangerous first 5 years, you have to ask yourself, can my portfolio survive until that point where I don't need to rely on it so heavily? For early retirees, it is the entire window that your portfolio is the primary source of income, and that window stays open until Social Security starts, until a pension kicks in, or an annuity begins, or spending flexibility increases meaningfully. And remember, everyone's situation is completely different. If you retire early and you already have a robust pension in play and perhaps good health coverage, for example, consider our military retirees, you might not have any danger zone at all. And early retirement failures don't generally happen in, say, year 2. They generally happen down the road, maybe year 8, 10, 12, but it's because of things that happened earlier, whether that was stagnant markets, high inflation, or simply lifestyle creep. Here's something the 5-year rule doesn't capture very well. Early retirees don't face just one sequence risk. They tend to face a series of stress tests that get stacked over time. And this is why early retirees face a different problem, not just a longer one. They don't have to worry about just one singular steep market drop. Instead, they also have to worry about a flat or choppy decade where markets technically recover, but returns aren't strong enough to offset ongoing withdrawals. Inflation arriving early, quietly resetting spending higher for every single year that follows. Healthcare costs before Medicare, when insurance premiums and out-of-pocket expenses are highest relative to income. And tax changes over a much longer horizon, where assumptions that felt reasonable at retirement no longer hold 10 or 15 years later. And none of these fit neatly into that 5-year box. And none of this would look like a dramatic failure in year 2 or 3. Rather, it's pressure that slowly builds year after year. So the real danger is being rigid, and being rigid over a very long bridge period. When Morningstar extends retirement simulations beyond the standard 30-year horizon, something important shows up. Longer retirements fail when 2 things show up. 1, bad timing, and 2, an inflexible strategy. In the data, extending retirement from 30 to 35 years lowers safe starting withdrawal rates, but flexible withdrawal strategies dramatically reduce failure rates, and portfolios with lower volatility early on often outperform more aggressive portfolios in terms of sustainability. So early retirees need more ways to have control when this type of damage shows up. And once you understand what causes these early retirement failures, you can then plan around it accordingly. Looking at those failure points, the protections are pretty darn clear. Early retirees who succeed tend to do a few very specific things. 1, they use flexible withdrawal strategies. Maybe that's guardrails. Maybe that's skipping an inflationary adjustment after a poor market year. It's simply responding to what your portfolio is actually experiencing rather than sticking to one fixed, inflexible strategy. 2, they time segment their money. This is really what people call a bucket strategy. You have money set aside with very low volatility, so it covers your near-term spending. Then you have money set aside for the future, and it's invested more aggressively. It's going to experience more volatility, but it's also going to capture more growth in the long run. And 3, they manage portfolio volatility over time. One of the most effective moves you can do is simply starting retirement with a portfolio that has lower volatility, and then slowly, as time goes on, increasing your equity exposure. That last point matters a lot because going into retirement with a lower volatility portfolio protects you from the period when the damage is hardest to undo. And then increasing your equity exposure over time allows you to capture higher returns, preserve your purchasing power once you're out of that danger zone. So here's a much better way to think about early retirement risk. Instead of obsessing over the first 5 years, think in phases. Phase 1, this is the fragile years. This phase lasts until income floors arrive. At this point, withdrawals are usually the largest as a percentage of assets, sequence risk is highest, and flexibility matters more than optimizing the portfolio. Phase 2. This is your bridge years. The portfolio pressure tends to begin to ease, assuming your portfolio is performing well. Tax strategy and spending discipline dominates here. Volatility matters less than sustainability. And phase 3, the fortified years. Social Security and guaranteed income are now in place and reduce your risk. Portfolio swings really matter far less, and longevity risk replaces sequence risk. And here's how we tie it all together. For early retirees, phase 1 is longer, but it doesn't have to be more dangerous. Because when you build your plan around the idea of flexibility, time can absolutely work in your favor. Let's make these phases real with an example. Imagine a couple planning to retire early at the same time. The wife is 55, husband is 50. They want to spend $80,000 per year. Medicare will begin at 65 for each of them, respectively. And they've decided that they want Social Security to start at 70 for each of them to maximize their household benefits. When they both claim Social Security, they'll receive about $65,000 per year as a household. $35,000 from her benefits, $30,000 are his benefits. This is a long retirement. We're looking at a retirement that could easily be 40 plus years. And this is exactly the situation where that 5-year danger zone doesn't really fit. So let's walk through this in phases. Phase 1, the fragile years. This phase begins the day they retire. For this couple, it is age 50 to 65 for him and age 55 to 65 for her. During this phase, the portfolio is funding 100% of their $80,000 lifestyle. Withdrawals are likely the largest percentage of assets they will ever be. Sequence of returns risk is at its highest, and there is no income floor yet. This is the period that Morningstar's research is really warning us about. It is the period where the portfolio is doing all of the work. This phase lasts 15 years for him and 10 years for her, far longer than a traditional or typical retiree. And the reason it's a little bit shorter for her is because she's older than him, and at age 65, she will go on Medicare, and this has a way of introducing a little bit more stability when it comes to healthcare costs. He will still have 5 years to go at that point. They start retirement with a lower volatility portfolio. They time segment their money, so near-term spending is insulated. And they use flexible withdrawals. Maybe that's guardrails, maybe it's skipping inflation raises after down years. It's responding to reality instead of just forcing a fixed paycheck. The goal in phase 1 is simple. You want to survive this period. You're not chasing returns. You're not trying to optimize every single piece of your portfolio. It is survival. Phase 2 is when Medicare kicks in, and this changes the picture. Healthcare costs have a way of stabilizing and becoming more predictable. And we have one other shift. All of a sudden, tax planning tends to take a bit more center stage here. They're still pulling from the portfolio, but now the withdrawals likely represent a smaller percentage of assets, assuming we built the buckets appropriately. The plan has already cleared the most dangerous structural risk. Flexibility still matters, but volatility is less threatening than before. The danger hasn't fully disappeared yet, but it's no longer as acute. At age 70, everything changes. Now, Social Security turns on. They're receiving $65,000 a year in guaranteed inflation-adjusted income. Against an $80,000 lifestyle, that means the portfolio only needs to supply about $15,000 per year. That is a massive shift. Also, it's highly likely that by this age, their spending has declined a bit. So maybe they're now spending $75,000 a year or $70,000 a year. And if that's the case, their Social Security benefits could be covering nearly all of their lifestyle. Now, portfolio volatility matters far less. Volatility is not going to derail your lifestyle, and all of a sudden we see that sequence risk really fades into the background. At this point, longevity risk is really more of the concern, but Social Security is largely taking care of this. Our portfolio is no longer the star, it's playing a supporting role if it plays a role at all. Ironically, this is when they can often afford to hold more equities, take more long-term growth risk, and spend more with confidence, even if they likely don't need to at this stage of life. So maybe they give themselves permission to gift more to their heirs while they're alive. This is where the good news comes in. The data consistently shows that early retirees who succeed tend to do 4 things. They lower their volatility early, so they're not chasing returns. They segment money by time, not by account type. They build in spending flexibility, even if it's modest. And they treat Social Security as risk insurance, not just a benefit decision. The goal is to survive potential bad timing long enough that the math starts to flip in your favor. The data doesn't actually say anything magical about the first 5 years. What it shows is that sequence risk is the most dangerous when your portfolio is doing all the work. Early retirement simply asks more of your plan, but it still aligns with all of the research. And when you design a plan that is adaptable and flexible, you automatically build a plan that is resilient by design. So, what are your plans? Are you aiming for an early retirement? And if so, how are you protecting yourself through all of these phases? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye. Hey guys. I don't want to start with that. I'm trying. If bad timing and 2, who counts 2 like this? I don't know why I did that. More longer as acute. Did anybody ever think like when they came out with acute, I was like, I am cute, thank you, not just me. The things I say to amuse myself. But seriously, every time, like if you talk about acute angles or acute pain, I'm like, it's cute, it's adorable. I'm so glad we've labeled it cute. It is a cute thing. I was fantastic in geometry. Actually, I did love geometry. Long enough for the math to flip in your favor. I almost said map, not math. Math. I mean, we could talk about maps. Does anybody want to go somewhere? I could use a vacation.